Hey, Debbie, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, I get lots of fancy titles, but I do have the title of CEO for Anchor Point, which is a nonprofit that works to help families thrive. And that really wasn't on my plan originally when I kind of laid out my life as to what I was going to be doing. And then I also get the wonderful title of, mom of 9 and grandma of 15. And so I love, family and watching families just grow and thrive and helping people figure out how to be successful in their personal faith and their family and then also in their legacies that they're creating. So that's what I kind of do.
How did all of it start?
Sure. I would say, well, I had this, it's really kind of funny, but I had this idea that I always wanted to be a young grandma and set out. I was like, I got to find the guy, fall in love, get married, have children, then I can do this. And the long story short is I found the guy. We tried to get pregnant, couldn't get pregnant, ultimately got pregnant with quads. And at 26 weeks, the boys were born and unfortunately, they passed away in my arms. And that was one of my biggest, hardest things I've walked through in my life is trying to figure out, like, oh my gosh, why is this the case? And why, all these why questions. And something that God really taught me in that was that I had to learn to lay down my why because my why was a stuck question and I wasn't going to be able to figure my way if I was sitting there still demanding, I need the why. And you know what? If God Himself would have shown up in front of me, if He would have told me the answer to why, the very next thing I would have said is, why? Why? Right? It's like you can't get out of that, right? And so he just quietly whispered to me, "Hey, you've got to put that down." And I'm like, "Well, what do I do after that?" And he's like, you asked me a different question." And I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "I don't know what to ask." And he's like, "Ask, how do I survive?" And then ultimately, as I started walking through that, then it becomes, how do I thrive? And when I got to asking the question of how do I thrive, then God was able to do some pretty amazing things. I was an engineer at the time. Took me out of that, took me into seminary, took me into ministry, and then being able to plant a seed in my head to be willing to do this ministry and to build it from scratch. And, now it's 15 plus years old. And then this idea of, okay, maybe parenting doesn't come just by birthing children. Maybe it comes through adoption and adopting children from hard places. And so all these things kind of came into play as I went through those challenges in life and learning how to lay those questions down. And that's kind of how we landed where I am today from that perspective.
Wow. What would you say to someone who maybe they've gone through a trial and they're still asking why and they're still questioning God? What would you say to them?
Sure. And I would say, hey, we've all done that, right? I don't think any of us are exclusive to that. And you know what? Even as a CEO, there are days that I go, why is this happening to me? And I'm like, okay. And I would go, we have to learn to trust God with our stories
Mhm.
and that He is writing good stories. And we may be in something difficult, but that if we can open our hands and let Him have our why, what I realized is that when I get to heaven, my why won't matter.
Mm.
It just won't matter anymore. And so right now, it is holding me back from becoming the person that I need to be to do the next thing that He's called me to do. And oftentimes, our deepest pain becomes our biggest purpose,
Mhm.
right? And it's hard to see when we're in the middle of it. It is really hard to see. I like to call it, it's like you're walking in the fog.
Yeah.
And we have to realize that the fog is actually the path and He is there the whole time. even though it feels like he might not be there. And I would go, hey, we've watched people through the Bible go through difficult things and we see how they got to the other side. And then we see people in life go through things and we watch how they get to the other side. And we have to hold on to that for our faith while we're struggling. And so find those stories that inspire you to keep doing the next thing. And I always tell people find the next best step, anything positive, anything forward motion, and just do whatever it is. And some days for me, you know, that was getting out of bed, brushing my teeth, walking around for 5 minutes, and then getting back in the bed. After I lost the boys, I'm like, life is too hard. And then the next day, I could do something around the house. And then eventually I could go back to work and I could start a ministry. I could do all these things, but it was just little steps in forward motion. So I would say, hey, the sun's coming out tomorrow. You got this. You can do this, and the fog will clear.
I think once you have gone through some of those trials and have overcome them and you're out of it and you look back and you can see and you be like, "Oh, I see what you were doing, God. I didn't see
Mhm.
it at the time, but now it's clear." I think once you've walked through a couple of those, I don't know, what do you think? Does it get easier to walk through the challenges because you know that God's going to use whatever it is that you're going through?
Well, I don't know if easier is the best word.
Yeah.
However, what I've learned is I think I've learned to trust faster because as I went through it, you take one step forward, God meets you there. He shines the path at your feet. So you know the next step, and then you do this and you do this. This is how healing happens, right? Or how overcoming happens. And that is the beginning of your faith muscle being strengthened, right? And so as your faith muscle gets strengthened, now he says start a ministry, several years later. And I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that originally. And then, 3 months later, after I prayed through it and worked through it with him, I'm like, okay, I'll jump. And so now I'm much more a yes girl without even having to understand. And that is because the faith muscle has continued to develop. And he's been faithful all the way through. And I don't understand. I won't always understand, but he is a good father and a good daddy, and he wants nothing but the absolute best for me. So I've learned to trust who he is versus what my situation looks like. And so is it easier? Yeah, but it's not it doesn't like it's still hard, right? And I mean, like I had a situation at Anchor Point wasn't too long ago where I got a wonderful employee lawsuit, and I was like, what? Why me? Why this? Why now? And I'm all of a sudden I went, okay, I can go there, but that's not going to be very helpful.
Mm.
So let me lay that down, and I should be asking, how do I figure my way through this? How do I survive this? And I took a deep breath and I was like, okay, I think I should call the attorney. And I'm like, that's probably a great next step, right? And I'm like going, okay, but it got me out of the emotional piece and it got me to positive motion. And did we figure our way? Did we ultimately thrive through it? Yes. But if I would have stayed in why, I could have got very derailed and very inward focused. And next thing I know, the whole ministry falls apart because I can't be the leader that I need to be in that situation. So,
That's really good. So, what does it look like to be a strong leader when the entire organization is counting on you and you're being refined by the fire?
yeah. So I would tell you that all before all wonderful breakthrough comes, all testing comes before that. And so I have just really, really learned that when difficult things start happening, something good's fixing to happen.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely imperative that I learn to walk through that well.
Hmm.
So, and usually it's interesting in organizations, a lot of times what'll happen is a lot of the chaos will happen because there's breakdowns in communication. And it's like this somebody assumed this and this happened or whatever. And I just have to go, okay, guys, We are not enemies. We're on the same team. And I said, this is just Satan's way of trying to derail what we're doing. But what I know is when we face difficult situations, how I, as the leader, face that, how I walk through that, um, is absolutely so important because everybody is watching. And so we have a wonderful opportunity in how we walk through challenges to teach and preach without saying words how people can learn how to do it. So, how can our children learn how to walk through suffering well when they see me walk through suffering well?
Mhm.
And that it doesn't take me out, it doesn't change my identity. And I think, that is some of the biggest legacy stuff we have to leave is how do you do this well? Because difficult things are going to happen. It says that the rain comes on the righteous and the unrighteous, right? Because it's trying to take out the word. And the way we fight that is we stand and we stand well. And so that's to me is just what I try and keep in perspective because it happens every day. You could get taken out every day if you let it happen. But I'm not going to do that. I trust him too much. And he's been so faithful and so good. And I'm so blessed that even what I think is a huge catastrophe is going to be okay. And we'll figure our way. So,
So a few things that you said, that a lot of times the trials come before the breakthrough.
mhm,
So I did a whole podcast episode on the wilderness season. For our listeners, it's 534. And
uh-huh,
I've experienced a very intense wilderness season where it's like, bam, you're in this, and it's one thing after another is happening. And you could question, like, why God? Why is this happening? Or you could look at, all right, how do I get stronger in this season? How do I trust God more in this season? Because then when you come out of it, that's how you become refined by the fire and become a strong leader.
right. I can't remember. I think it was Dan Moeller had a sermon that talked about if you're going to have to go into the wilderness season, go in like Jesus, not like the Israelites.
Yes.
Because the Israelites, it was 40 years and they still didn't get it quite right. And Jesus, 40 days, empowered by the Holy Spirit, more on fire when he came out of there, and I'm going, I'd much rather learn it in 40 days. And so, so when you think about that, I'm like, I want the Jesus wilderness. If we're going, let's go there. So,
I think those are great lessons of actually studying those two accounts of like what were the
mhm,
Israelites doing in the wilderness? They were whining, they were complaining, they weren't really trusting God versus Jesus relied on the word. And
mhm.
every temptation that came his way, he fought back with the word of God.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And not only that, the Spirit led him into the wilderness,
So
right?
that's
And
such an important concept because it's
yeah.
like, okay, you're actually going into this. I'm allowing this to happen
Mhm,
for you to be strengthened.
mhm.
And I
Yeah,
think when we understand, because I don't think it's preached enough, I don't think suffering is preached enough, that the Bible talks about us suffering and being refined by the fire, and actually going through a wilderness season can be a huge part of our journey in becoming a strong leader.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's scripture that says that we should have joy in suffering, right? And that we should be excited to be able to suffer alongside of Christ.
Hmm.
That's like, I'm like going, I don't know if I got excitement yet, but I'm like, okay, God. But I'm going, when it cannot damper our light
Mm.
is when the biggest gains are made in the kingdom. And so as when we keep that perspective, it is so healthy for us. It's hard, like you said. And but I mean, I've gotten to the point where I go, okay, that's item number 4, number 5, here comes number 5. I got to the point where I'll just laugh and I'm like, okay, we got to be getting close to the end because this is ridiculous what we're dealing with right now. And so, and then I'm going, okay, God, I'm going to still praise you in the storm. And this is what we're doing, you know?
Yeah, focusing on praise and worship. I was just thinking of, I think it was Paul and Silas that were in prison in
Mhm.
Acts. And when they were in
Uh-huh.
prison, they worshiped.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And
Hmm.
that's when they were able to get out, when
Yeah.
the earthquake. So it's like, what do we do when we're in that storm? Do we ask why or do we worship?
Right. Yes, very much so. And I mean, I have the playlist for when I'm struggling that puts me right on just praising him, and going, let me remember my perspective, because nothing that you and I are facing is even close to anything that Jesus faced on our behalf.
Yeah.
And he says that I am fully capable of walking through it just like he did. And I'm like going, okay, then that's something to aspire to. And so I'm like going, yeah, I want to be that type of person from that perspective.
So you said we can preach without saying a word.
Hmm.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So how can our lives preach without us actually saying anything?
Mhm. Yeah. Everybody, I mean, and I think about my staff, they're all, I had a friend, it was in our small group, and he got diagnosed with brain cancer, and very aggressive. And um, he and I ended up in a quiet discussion one day in small group over on the side. And I said, you do know that you're going to be healed. The only question is whether it's on this side or that side of heaven. I said, so the real question here is, how do you choose to walk through this so that your wife and your children know how to walk through hard times? This is the legacy you get to choose right now. He didn't like me all the time, but it's like, but I was just like, this is your chance. He ultimately passed away, unfortunately. But I'm going, his children and his wife are doing so well because he chose to do it
Mm.
so well. And what would their lives potentially have been like if he wouldn't have suffered well? And I go, it could have derailed these three beautiful kids and this wife, and they're all thriving. They miss their dad, and stuff, but it was beautiful watching him. And you listen to the people in small group and others who watched, and they still, I mean, this has been, I don't know, 5, 6 years, and they still are like, use that as an example at different times, and you just hear the amount of impact that it had on them. And that's what we all need to be about, from that perspective.
'Cause he could have I mean, he had 2 choices there. He could have suffered in that and made that very clear to everyone around him that he was suffering and in pain, and that could cause his children to walk away from the Lord and then question God of, "Why did you make my father
Yes.
suffer?" and all these things, but instead, he chose to walk through it in such a way that everyone's
Yeah.
talking about how he trusted God in the midst of
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah. And I mean, we think about Paul, we just finished Acts, and if you're reading Paul, it's like you get beat up at this and you go to the next city and they whip your butt, and you go to the next one, he's beat up at that one. And I'm like, oh Lord, he taught me how to suffer well. Then he's on his way to Rome, shipwreck, gets off, gets bit by a snake. I'm like, okay, my life is just not like that. I'm like, I can do this. And Paul still stayed focused and went after the prize. And that's what we have to be committed to. And I think you're right. It does boil down to the fact that we don't really teach that very well. And the fact that our lives aren't just about getting to heaven and being with God forever. It's about living the kingdom now, and living out uh, Christ example to us. And that's a way bigger picture. And we just miss that a lot. And especially over here in the West. Versus in some third world countries where, they're martyred for their faith and stuff like that. We don't see that as much here.
Mhm. So what did it look like for you to get over the struggle, the suffering, to say, I'm gonna start to adopt these babies, to end up with 9 babies, and in the midst of that, start the organization?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it ended up being, I was an engineer at the time when we were pregnant with the boys. And we did, after losing the boys, we did try and go back and maybe try and to get pregnant again. And I had to call a halt to that because I just couldn't handle it. I was too exhausted. My body was exhausted. I was emotionally exhausted. And I just looked at my husband and said, I can't do this. And now, but I've still got this plan in my head. I'm going to be a young grandma. This is what I'm supposed to be. Right. And I'm like, how do I get there, God? And so actually, God took me out of engineering and into seminary and into ministry. And so I went through the whole transition there. And then finally, when I was working my first full time position, I looked at my husband. I was like, okay, dude, we got to get serious about this if we're going to do this. And we sat down and had a discussion about we could go try and get pregnant again and spend thousands and thousands of dollars doing that potentially, or and end up with nothing. Or we could see if there was children that were sitting in our foster care system that were legally free that just needed a home. And we could spend our thousands of dollars on those kids. Either way, we're going to be broke. But so we could do it this way and have children. And so we ended up just sitting down and talking about like, you know, could we love someone that wasn't our own blood, and could we do these things? I looked at my husband and I said, I love you and you don't have my blood. And that works out all right. And so God must have a way of working this out. And so we just began pursuing that. And we actually did 3 different adoptions over a course of about 12 years. And the first one was a sibling group of 5, and then a sibling group of 2, and then a sibling group of 2. So if you want a blended, messy family, that's ours. But it has been that has been another place where we've learned to trust God, and we've learned to work with these kiddos that bring a lot of trauma with them, that need people that create a loving, safe space for them to walk through that. And in that process, I was working for Prison Fellowship and running prison ministry across 3 states. And I had 7 kids, and God says, well, I need you to start this ministry. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I got a full-time ministry at home. I work in ministry full time. Go find someone else. I'm like, I'm busy. And we went about 2 years, he and I wrestling with this. And we know that ultimately I don't win. So that's why I'm a yes girl now. But as we wrestled with it, uh, he finally got so fed up with me just pushing it off that he removed my job in about a week. And it was so painful. It was such a painful experience. And after I walked through that, God just was like, okay, have you got time now?
Mm.
And I'm like, great, I'll do it. I'm in, I'm done, and I will do what you want me to do. And that is, how I started talking about it. And it was interesting because, you get this idea to start starting a ministry is similar, but very different than starting a business. There's a lot of parallels, but at the same time, I have to sell a vision of something that you want to give your money to with no return.
Yeah.
And so it was very interesting because I'm like, God, you really want me to tell people I'm going to do this? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. And he's like, tell him anyway. I'm like, okay. And so sharing a vision with people of here's what we're going to build and here's what we're going to do. And let's do this crazy thing that outlives us and can leave a legacy. And people would tell me originally, they would say, that's great and wonderful. Wish you nothing but the best. And, if you're here in a couple of years, we'll support you. I'm like, for real? And so, so the first few years, I remember God required me to write checks out of my personal bank account to fund paying the employees that we had. So I would write $5,000 or $10,000 checks, and I would, and you got to remember, I'm not working at the time. And, we got 7 kids, and I would call my husband, and I'm working free in the ministry. And I'd call my husband and I would go, dude, don't spend any money because I just wrote this huge check out of the bank account. And he's like, is there any money in there? And I'm like, I didn't look. I just wrote the check. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, God, if you don't show up, we are so broke and destitute. But he showed up every time. And so he continually showed up and just taught me um, that I could trust him. And his timing is not always my timing. But if you are in the center of what God's called you to do, He's going to be faithful to come through in some form or fashion, and we can just lean in and trust that. And that's all we've done at Anchor Point is I just started building it with a friend, and we've continued to build it and add on parts. And now I have this, $1 million plus organization that impacts thousands every year, and it's amazing that we get to be a part of that, and I don't have to write the checks for the payroll anymore out of my bank account, which is a wonderful blessing. But it took about 3 years for people to really go, oh, you're serious? You're really going to be here? And I'm like, yeah, I've been saying that. And so now that we're, you know, 15 years down the road, it's like, okay, how do we make it so it lasts forever? And continue to build it and continue to grow and impact more people. And, that's really why I wrote the book, The Heart of Legacy, is to go, okay, this is our story and my story. And your story can be the same thing. You can leave a legacy, but if you're going to do it, you have to be very intentional about what you do now. And that is one thing I learned with losing the boys is that eternity matters. And I wanted everything after losing the boys to be about impact for that. And so that changed my focus about how I went about everything. And my boys' legacy continues on because of that. And so that's a real blessing from that standpoint.
Wow. How did you articulate the vision of what you were doing to get so many people on board that they started to donate? What did that process look like?
Well, I went to it was really funny because God would say, talk about this. And I'm like, I don't want to be talking about this. And so I'm having this out of body experience of talking about it in my head. I'm going, I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be doing this. And I'm talking about this thing. And I took one of my friends to lunch and I looked at her and I said, hey, I have a crazy idea. And I was sure she was going to say no. So I was like, I have this crazy idea that God's kind of planted in my head. And, I said, what do you think about like trying to build something that might outlive us? And she was so excited. And I was like, no, you're not supposed to be excited. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be able to go, okay, I was obedient and let's shut the doors. But it was funny. Every time I would talk about it, people would get excited about it. They might not give their money to it, but they were like, oh, yes, this is good. And so before we ever started the ministry, I pulled together about 6 or 7 pastors and just shared the idea with them. And this was just something that we had written on a piece of paper, is how we wanted to build a ministry that helped families that basically went through all of life from choosing life for the child to breaking cycles to getting you to adulthood so you don't come back as a person in the ministry. And I would just talk about it and people would go, oh, that's good. We should do that. So I had these pastors and they were excited. They didn't want to give any money, but they were excited and they, wanted to get people involved in helping. And before we ever opened the doors, we had an info session. Okay. And we invited anybody we knew. And these pastors invited people or whatever. And there was like 250 people there. And my friend and I looked at her and I'm like, well, who's talking? And she's like, you're talking. And I'm like, no. And she's like, yeah. I'm like, no. So I get up in front of these people and I just go, here's what we're doing. We're going to build this ministry. Here's how it's going to impact people. Here's the different phases of what we think God's going to build. And it was like something we just drew on a piece of paper. And, really almost every aspect of that is now a reality in the ministry, except for one particular thing. And we just continued to do it and people got excited and they started serving and doing all these things. And about year 3, year 4 was when people started really kind of financially backing it because it was like, oh, you're not just a startup anymore. And that was very nice when that started happening. And it made for life a little bit easier. But people it's just amazing what God does. And if we stay faithful. Now, we've had plenty of times that have been hard or like seasons like, I mean, what do you do in the middle of COVID? We kept our doors open all during COVID, and serve people from that perspective, or what about when, we're in Houston, Texas? What about when a hurricane comes through? And, the last huge one that we had in Houston that had all the flooding, I actually lost the bottom floor of my house and I'm sitting on an island upstairs and I'm going, I have no idea if our buildings even made it. And so the buildings were fine, but like, how do you deal with staff? And are you going to be able to raise money to cover that? Because the whole area is devastated and you still want to meet the needs and God somehow shows up in all that. And when we get off track, or people are misaligned in the organization and it hurts the ministry, do you have hard times? Yes. And do you have to change people on the bus? Yes. And you just work through all that. But I would tell you that I have one lady that I would share with that we were starting the ministry and she would cry every time I would talk about it. This is before we ever started. Great Christian woman. And I was like, why are you crying? Because isn't this supposed to be a good thing? And come to find out, after the ministry had started, um, she had actually had an abortion 40 years before. And she was married to baby daddy, and they had told no one. And this ministry kind of hit right at home in that. And she actually ended up going through one of our first abortion recovery groups and actually ended up leading that ministry for us. And she got an award at our 10-year anniversary. And I remember whispering in her ear, and I said, I would do it all over again if it was just for you, because of the life change and the impact in her. And this was a Christian lady and the impact that she has in ministering to people that have gone through similar situations as her. And I'm like, I do it all again. I do it all again just for that. And, we just had our gala and I had another girl that's been part of the ministry for about 10 years. And she's been ministered to through the ministry for about 10 years, her and her family. And she was so cute the other day. She goes, I want to be just like you. I want to come work for Anchor Point. And I'm like, one day soon, you'll be here. And I just go, that just makes it. And, when you see the kids and the kids are as tall as you because they're 15 and you're just going, this kid is here because this ministry existed. And, so that gets exciting. And I get excited that long after I'm in heaven, I'll be meeting people that will still be around because they were impacted by a ministry that's here.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love it. So good.
Mhm.
What advice would you have to our listeners who wanna leave a legacy, but they're
Yeah.
maybe you how to start or what that looks like? So what advice?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I would go I always offer to your listeners my book free of charge. So that's a wonderful gift for them that they can have. That is certainly a way to help them start thinking about this. So that would be one thing, but I would go, your legacy is created because you choose to be intentional. So each of us are here for a particular reason, and we have a job to do on this side of heaven. And so I'm going, find that, seek that. And it may not be what I get paid to do. And that's fine. It's wonderful when you get paid and your passions, everything aligns together. But I would go, hey, there are lots of people who fund our ministry because they have the gift of giving, and they're in their sweet spot and they're leaving their legacy and partnership with us. But I'm going, everything we do is about influence, and we have the opportunity to do that. So you and I are going to leave a legacy. It's just a matter of whether we're going to write it or it's going to be written for us. And so we get to choose, and being intentional about it is the way to go about it. So I would go, if you don't know what you're doing in that, you ought to get someone to coach you, to help you, to think through, like, how do I do business? How do I do legacy? How do I do life? And that's what I love to help people do and help them see, is that you can do all those things, that you can be focused and fearless and faithful and all those things. It's possible, but it's strategic, right? And so be strategic. Don't just let life kind of slip past you and then you're at the end and you're going, I guess this is my legacy, right?
Yeah. Where can we connect with you?
Sure. My website is DebbieSimmons.com. And it has all the social media things on there and everything like that. And then for the book, if they'd like to get the book, it's theheartoflegacy.com. And that'll take you right in there, and they just pay for the shipping, and the book is free. And so it's a blessing for them to get started on their legacy journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I've loved hearing
Yeah.
your story. It's so inspiring. So thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it.